Dun, 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 dun. Welcome to Green Rapids.
You actually did it.
I did
You just
it.
made my whole entire day.
You're welcome.
You are listening to Green Rapids.
Today we're going to talk about a couple of different things, mostly focusing on national parks and how they came to be and how they affected the indigenous peoples as they came into existence.
Yeah. And I think in this episode, what we also want to do is kind of find a commonality between things that we enjoy and then also understanding like their history and maybe looking to move forward from that history effectively.
Yeah, because like sometimes it's like a thing that we can take for granted without really realizing the price that it costs other people, you know? And then I feel like, you know, in most of these cases, really, like that cost a lot of blood to make a lot of these parks come into being.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, I was also thinking about like that's exactly how we get to the point of climate changing is we don't really understand the impacts of like what we're doing or what we can change by trying to gain in a certain way. And so, yeah, it's just an interesting topic, but also something I really love is the national parks of this country. And so I kind of really love this discussion.
Apparently, the minimum size for a national park is 1,000 hectares.
Okay, so that is just because
What is a hectare, though?
probably a fancy like amount of acres. It's probably like what? I'm assuming
Hectares. Well, what's heck? Is that 8?
that's 8. I was gonna say I'm assuming 8,000 acres.
2 acres. 2,471.
What
the frick?
Why would they measure it like that?
It doesn't even divide cleanly.
I want to talk
it's
to
like
someone.
2,471.05.
Okay, so
Who did this?
that's probably why Michigan doesn't have the ability to do that because we have
Effed up measuring system. Anyway, I actually have a bone to pick with the history of national parks. I mean, I'm happy that they're here, obviously.
yeah.
I'm just kind of happy about how they went about it. Many of you might have remembered the term manifest destiny from your high school history class. And manifest destiny is basically, according to canacademy.org, is the idea that white Americans are divinely ordained to settle the entire continent of North America. So the ideology is basically like God wants white people to come in and remove or destroy the native population so that white people can thrive in these beautiful spaces.
I have a question.
That's manifest destiny.
Is that actually based on like a religious thing?
Yes. I mean, it's basically the whole like America thing. Like that's how like
Yeah.
the America
I
started.
know. It's so odd to me that like we even that concept is laughable. It feels so weird to just hear that like we were supposed to do this.
Yeah, and then everybody just went along with it. Isn't
But
that
also
wild?
like our dollar says in God we trust.
Yeah.
Manifest destiny is woven into our history.
Yep.
But like separation of church and state.
Not woven into the history.
Are you sure, Nancy? It's written into the Constitution.
Wow. Can we talk about?
No,
No, we will
I'm
not
kidding,
get
I'm
into
kidding, I'm
current
kidding.
events because that is a big bone to pick.
We don't have enough time.
Yeah.
So manifest destiny is kind of then what sparked the idea of what national parks, or maybe not national parks specifically.
But it started the mindset that
Yes.
like everything that was here was for the taking.
Yeah.
There was no respect or acknowledgement of the native people that were here. You may or may not have heard of the famous nature photographer Ansel Adams.
That name is so familiar, but I don't know enough.
He was like one of the first photographers to start to document a lot of the natural areas around, like moving into the West from like, you know, the original 13 colonies and whatnot. And one of the things that he did is that he took these incredibly pristine photos of just like untouched wilderness. And so the way he's like presenting this and marketing this is that's like this perfect untouched wilderness just there for the taking. So that really like he really just projected the white gaze onto this landscape and was like, hey, look, there's all this beautiful land. We need to move out west. And that's honestly one of the, like, at this time, photography was just becoming really popular and really portable. So he was able to just, like, travel. And the thing is, like, there were people in all these
Oh,
places that he was
totally.
going to.
I mean, are these his photos right here?
These are not his photos. These
Okay.
are from a different photographer. His name is Huffman.
Okay.
But
Maybe documented a little bit more accurately.
He documented the people of this place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, he did it through the white gaze also, and
Mhm.
like enforced a lot of stereotypes about the natives with a lot of his portraits.
Yeah.
But he at least acknowledged, like, hey, there's people here. Whereas Ansel Adams was just like, nothing's here. It's vacant. Lots available for sale, you know?
And I think that also helps like reinforcing mindset, right? So when we think about some of the most intense moments in history where you're like, I can't believe people did that. Why would they do something like that? I think we also have to remember that there are people out there who are not only reinforcing this behavior, but they're giving you proof saying like, well, it's just nature. There's no one living there. It's just, you know, free open land, and we should take advantage of this.
Yeah, and I actually learned a lot of this from one of my art history teachers in college named Jill Schneider. And prior to this, like, I had never had art history taught in a way that really recognized or acknowledged a lot of like the racial undertones of a lot of the art that we were witnessing. So it was really great to kind of get that perspective and learn about like, oh shoot, there really are some differences. And like Ansel Adams was like really, really famous too. So he was just like a really big influence
But
in American culture at the time.
He died in
I mean, I sure hope so.
1982. Oh yeah, he's gone now. He lived forever and continued to spread lies. No, he was born in 1902. Even if there wasn't people there, it's because like things like the Trail of Tears. It's like things because of displacement. Like that was kind of strategic. But there were still people living there, and there are still people living in those spaces to this day that still have much more right than we give them. Or they still have, you know, we're all much more deserving than what most of the reservations in this country are given.
Right.
And so it's kind of bizarre that even in that year, with the understanding of how things have gone, they still stayed so far separated from the truth. But the first national park was created in 1872. And that was Yellowstone.
Ooh, that's a big one.
Yeah, Yellowstone. And I mean, we love that, right? It's
wolves can live there without getting hunted down too much.
And it's so important to keeping ecosystems the way that they should stay, because although wolves are really scary, they eat certain animals that shouldn't be there in abundance too. And I don't know if you all know this, but I'm sitting here next to a wolf right now.
Oh.
Yeah, there she goes. Look out. So it's like you have Trail of Tears, then you have Gold Rush, and then you have national parks forming.
Yeah. So there's like kind of like a racial impetus, because obviously people were racist against the indigenous people, and they saw them as like savages. And then there's also like an economic impetus, which is a gold rush.
Yeah.
And then there's also like just like a social impetus, because then, and like I guess you could say religious, because Manifest Destiny was pretty religious because they really believed that God was like, take over, homies.
And then like I think what's weird about all of that too is like after pushing people out of their homes that do everything they can to preserve the space that they're in, we decide that these parks have to be preserved so that we can benefit from them and so we can keep them safe.
And it's like, what about the people who were there first? How can they benefit from it?
Well, and what about the homes that they had on that land before? Then now you're telling people, you know,
then
you
it
can't
becomes
live
a museum
here.
of like, look at these people that used to live here.
Exactly. And so I think it's just it's a beautiful way to celebrate, and I think it's so important to understand like what a preserve is, but I also think it's also like really important to understand that there were hundreds of thousands of people living in these spaces before they were, you know, displaced completely. And then one more fact I'll kind of throw out there. This is in Yosemite. In 1849 brought the gold rush. A lot of non-Indian miners, non-indigenous miners to the Sierra Nevada, and they were ruthless, you know, so they not only decided that they were going to destroy the land there, but they were also going to do whatever they needed to do to get people away from that space so they could get what they needed. And the, you know, U.S. Army gets involved. And then it kind of just became like a standard of lifestyle to be Euro-American. So like the food, lifestyles, clothing, jobs, everything just became very colonized in that space. And then there's just this fact that in the early 1900s began to shrink dramatically with the amount of people that were living in those spaces. They started disbanding villages of people who were indigenous to that space. And then the housing was taken over by the National Park Service, which, and it says right here on their website, the National Park Service gradually dismantled the new village, and the last homes were razed in 1969. Today, the descendants of the Yosemite native people live nearby and scattered throughout the world. In 1990, there were only 400 in a nearby county and 500 in the other. So, less than 1,000 people population living in that area just over 100 years later. It's just, again, we have to talk about those differences. Like, there were people in those spaces and there was culture in those spaces.
Yeah. And then the fact that they were basically forced to assimilate in order to survive and, like, eat, wear our clothes. And I mean, by our, I guess I mean American. The colonizers' clothes and, like, the Euro-American just styles of working, and, like, the women were, basically turned into domestic servants, really. Just providing, like, housekeeping and childcare services for the very people that came to remove them from their freaking land and took away their normal way of life.
Which is like the generalized standard that we set for people of color in this country. Because as soon as, Black people were released from slavery, or released, as soon as slavery became illegal enough for people to not be able to do it at the scale they were doing it, people were still, stuck to working those jobs, being nannies and housekeepers and cleaning people's homes and their businesses and, the jobs that nobody really wants to do. And I mean, today we see it in our other cultures. Immigrants who come here, we ask them to do the jobs that we don't want to do.
I mean, even before they were immigrants, when the West was still part of Mexico, like, and colonization was moving, west and south, as these areas were being taken over, like, all of the native indigenous people, some of which may or may not have been my ancestors, were also forced to take on these, like, more domestic roles of, like, servitude.
Yeah. And we see it a lot. And actually, oh my goodness, I'm so glad we're talking about this, because my dad has a business where he does renovations to people's, like, yards, and then he'll also do some to their homes. He used to do a lot of painting and stuff like that, and he says he has a really hard time getting certain dynamics of people, mainly Black men, to do these labor intensive jobs. And then he was talking about how he has a lot of Mexican people who, like, jump on the jobs. They're there. He was like, they're there before me, they're ready to work. And I was like, well, you have to realize the cultural difference, right? There's so much pride behind working in that way for your culture, and this is something that we've talked about. And then in my culture, we're like, no way am I going to do these hard labor jobs. That brings me back to, like, a slavery mindset. I'm not going to go work on rich people's homes when I'm having a hard time affording to feed my family. And so I think, again, like, we totally forget their entire, like, cultures, and I don't know, there are bits and pieces woven into this country that are kind of beautiful, but they're also things that we really have to break down to completely understand, like, why there are so many Native people who don't have appreciation for our way of life today.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I don't blame them. So
yeah, right. Okay. But what is your favorite national park? Because I know that you kind of grew up in an area where you could visit one frequently.
Yeah. So I would say, I mean, Yosemite is probably one of my favorites. That's probably the first big national park I really went to when I was a kid.
I mean, it's huge.
It's huge, yeah. Like, my best friend's family, the Ramos, they brought me along for one of their family camping trips once when I was a teen. And it was actually my first time being out in, like, wilderness, because I was such a deep city kid, and because, like, I grew up, like, Compton, Los Angeles, Long Beach, so, like, seeing, like, the wild, that was, like, super mind blown, because I was like, holy cow, that this is just, like, in movies.
Oh, totally. Well, and then, like, think about the, like, how large of a city Compton is and, like, Los Angeles is, and then you think about, like, going to Yosemite, like, the difference
is stark.
That's
even
wild.
And then, like, even just, like, tasting the air for the first time, so wild, like, such a wild difference to me.
How old were you when you first visited?
Oh, I must have been maybe 14, 13.
Okay. Did that, like, spark your interest in nature in a large way, or were you already, like, really interested in it before?
It actually, yeah, it made me more interested in nature. Because my family, my dad loves going to the Azusa Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we would do for holidays. And it is really cool, but it's also very tamed. Like there's roads, there's like paved trails, there's always people up there on holidays. So like it almost just kind of felt like going to a park than going out into the wilderness.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
then
I know what you mean.
yeah, like there every time we drove up there for a holiday, there would already be like people swimming in the river. You know, like it was just already very, like I said, tame. But I feel like going to Yosemite where they were like there's bear traps and
That's right.
they have like bear proofs like locker storage for your
Bear
food.
boxes. That's when you know it's real. We don't have that.
Yeah.
I mean, we have bears in Michigan, but like not to the point where like you have to worry about them.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah, and then like all these precautions that the Ramos family was taking to like just be safe and set up a camping area. Like it was like we were like roughing it.
But don't you feel really connected too?
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that's one thing that I noticed visiting a national park, and I went to a handful of national parks on a trip. And I think just like being in those areas, you don't really understand what the abilities of nature has until you've been to a space that's been untouched for well over 100 years. And that's why, again, like although we have to recognize the history of these national parks, we also have to realize the importance of having these spaces and the importance of continuing to preserve what we have currently. One of my favorite national parks is Glacier National Park in Montana.
Ooh, that sounds pretty.
I cannot say enough good things about Glacier. It was just one of the most vast, beautiful spaces I've ever been. And then just a little fun fact I want to drop. The Hoy National Rainforest is in the U.S. And I did not know that we had a United States national.
Is it in Florida?
No, it's in Washington State.
What the frick?
It sits just outside of a reservation where there's a lot of native culture. So shout out to all my Twilight lovers in the house. That's near Forks, Washington.
Like I was like, oh, I see now the rainy place that Bella talked
Oh my goodness,
about.
I could talk about this visit all day because it was just so like.
Wait, did you read the Twilight series?
Oh yeah, it was touching all of my heart, like my deep spots. I'm like, oh my goodness. True love was found in this forest right here on this beach.
I mean, I'm just saying creepy love.
Yeah, no,
whatever.
Well, yeah, but isn't all love
kind of
dark and creepy? Incredibly toxic. No, but the Hoy National Rainforest is a part of the Olympic National Forest. And so if you want to visit a rainforest in this country, you can...
Without having to have a passport?
Yeah, and it's the Pacific Northwest. I would recommend it a trillion times. It is way over there for us in Michigan. But not only that, like you have Cascades and you have like just so many parks to visit in that area. But I love the fact that we have a rainforest in that area, that it's near a reservation.
I like that we have a rainforest, period.
I think that's so cool. And going there, like the trees are dripping in moss, that wildlife is so intense and vast. And it's a little bit harder as a person to live there. And I kind of like that nature's like, I'm not going to let you dry your clothes.
That's true. You're always just kind of damp, right?
It is so damp there. But it rains enough and holds enough moisture.
Yeah, I feel like that would have ruined my hair.
Oh, yeah. No. It's a good place to visit.
I was like, I'm a desert
certain people might not thrive there.
Another thing I was reading too when I was looking at how national parks started is that even just like the way the stories are framed. So, for example, a lot of national park action started through lobbying efforts from people like Lady Bird Johnson, who was the First Lady of the United States.
With that, there are a lot of different reasons why it is important for people to invest in these spaces. And some of those spaces are going to be like the National Park Service. If you are interested in preserving these spaces, because although people have been displaced and it doesn't allow for them to live there, I think that allowing for people to live there in the lifestyles that we have today would just completely ruin those spaces. And as we've been kind of pressing on, the best way to reduce our carbon footprint is also to make sure that we have carbon eaters around and make sure that our our environments are flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
So the Department of Natural Resources, DNR, is the agency in the state of Michigan charged with maintaining natural resources, such as state parks,
Mm-hmm.
state forests, and recreational areas.
Mm-hmm.
It is governed and director appointed by the governor. And so there are places that, make sure that we are protected. And I think we should continue to maintain that
Mm-hmm.
because this land is legally set aside so that it can be safe from harm.
Mm-hmm.
And as humans, we tend to be kind of harmful.
We are.
There's also, in Michigan, we want to be 30 by 30, which is President Biden's 30 by 30 initiative to conserve at least 30% of land and ocean in the United States by 2030. It's a land conservation to have at least 30% of land and ocean in the United States by 2030. And in Michigan, we are at 19.2%. Although we are looking to be carbon free, I think it's 45, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure that we're on our way there. But in Michigan, we have 19.2% of land that is currently protected, which is 7.89 million acres of federal, state, and local conserved lands, private preserves, and conservations of agricultural easements.
Oh, interesting.
So we do have quite a bit.
Yeah.
But I mean, when you really think about how much land that means we need to preserve as a country, 30 by 30, that's quite a bit. And so
I think it'd be really cool to just buy some land and I can have my own little mini nature preserve.
if you want to talk about the neighborhood garden that you help run,
Oh, sure.
there are things like that. So neighborhood gardens are a way that we are going to help preserve the land that we have. One, we're going to feed our communities, and then two, we're going to make sure that we have biodiversity in this area, that we're going to try to plant native plants so that we can thrive in these spaces.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll give you a little platform for
Thanks.
RPN.
So one of my, I have a seasonal job with the Roosevelt Park Neighborhood Association as a community gardener. And basically what I do is I manage a little garden in the middle of the hood in the Roosevelt Park neighborhood.
We love that.
Love the hood. And I basically just help manage it and get gardeners organized and do some programming and things throughout the summer. But I also kind of teach people how to grow their own food.
Okay, cool.
One of the big goals for this garden is to create a space for food sovereignty skills and for food security skills, because if people learn how to grow their own food, obviously that's lesser dependency on the capitalist system.
Yeah.
So it's really great to just teach people how to grow their own tomatoes, their own vegetables. It is a mostly Hispanic and Black community there, so and then thankfully I'm bilingual, so it's just a really great job. And it's also really great just meeting people with families who are I want to feed my kids healthy food, but groceries are getting so expensive. I'm sure most of you have noticed just the ever increasing cost of food.
Yeah.
So with food inflation happening and these people in basically a food desert, seeking just to have healthy food for their kids, it's just nice to have a way to provide that for these families. So some of the things that I do, other than growing some vegetables for the farmers market and helping people, just guiding them and setting up the garden and things. But another thing that we're also working on doing is planting native plants around the outside of the garden, in the non-food producing areas.
Is that for pollinators?
It's for pollinators.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so we're actually working with a landscaper from Reverie Studio. Her name is Rebecca Marcotte.
Okay.
And she's a landscaper who's an expert in native plants and landscape design using native plants. And we're able to work with her thanks to some assistance from the John Ball Zoo. They're kind of sponsoring the project.
And they gave you a bunch of seeds, didn't they? Or who was that?
They did, and then I also have a bunch of seeds from the Pure Cedar Creek Institute.
Very cool.
So just a lot of really, it's just really great seeing community kind of come together to support this too, the garden. But we're also concerned about biodiversity. Currently the garden does have some native plants.
Okay.
That were planted, but it was pre-COVID and before I was managing the garden. So a lot of invasive species have been starting to try and take over.
Yeah.
The tree of heaven. Okay, if you guys see a tree of heaven, chop it down. Burn it.
You have to look that up because you have to make sure you're talking about the right
Oh,
tree.
make sure it's the right tree. If you have, there's an app called Seek by iNaturalist, and it's a plant ID app.
Okay.
And you can also earn little badges and stuff when you
Very
discover
cool.
new species, or like when I think I recently got. Hold on, I want to check what my current level of explorer is.
Oh man, I love that you have level. I mean, does that make you want to do it more? You get like a little badge, and they're like, "Hey, you did it."
Yeah, because I'm like, I freaking did it. So I got. Where's my badges? How do I look at myself? Achievements, challenges. I think it's no achievements. So I'm at the level of explorer. But for example, I started off at the level of, I think, like, I don't know, some like newbie level.
But that was the app that you were using when we went on the hike, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was like, oh, I found another plant that I didn't get
That
before.
was super cool.
Yeah.
So I guess one other place I want to plug before we do our call to action and kind of end our conversation is Highlands in the Walker, Grand Rapids area.
Mm-hmm.
Blandford Nature Center is
yeah.
the founder, and they talked about acquiring a neighboring golf club to expand their nature center. Noting that would be their last major conquest for many years, so they wanted to have a really great thing. In 2017, the Land of Conservancy of West Michigan helped, so they collaborated and purchased 121 acres of the golf course in Grand Rapids, and they turned that into our area of recreation and education. And so I just think that's a really cool way, because it's noted like there's a long-term restoration of this landscape to allow the land to heal and flourish after decades of abuse, right? It'll bring substantial improvements to water and air quality in the city and help with the city's goal of increasing the urban forest canopy. The project also offers hands-on educational opportunities and is a model for large-scale urban restoration in the region. So this is actually on the Highlands website itself. I would definitely recommend going to visit and just taking a look. Nice. But these are just ways that we can help encourage the areas that we live in to restore spaces. Like, it is great to have places to golf, but like, how many do we need, and what does that do to our nature to destroy it like that?
Monoculture.
Totally, and
like
it
it's
continues.
Just like the same kind of grass, and then maybe like 2 or 3 different types of trees.
Yeah, and it continues to reinforce the idea that we can do whatever we want to whatever we want if we have the dollars to do so.
Yeah, not to mention the pesticides and weed killer that they probably use to maintain
it,
poisoning the water table.
So even if people wanted to live there, they would really have to restore that space anyway. So something that I'm going to just do call to action is pick a park, take a hike.
Boycott golf course. Sorry, I'm like such a boycotter.
Nancy, oh my God, I love the contrast between what we just said. Like, I'm like, it's okay, take it easy this month, and Nancy's like, if you go golfing and I see you out there.
I mean, mini golf is different.
5 points from Gryffindor.
Mini golf is cute.
Go mini golfing instead of
like big open unnecessary amounts of grass golfing.
No, but really, I mean, my call to action is just to be pick a park and go to them. Potentially find a way to support them by either joining one of their educational groups. You can donate. You can just educate yourself on the types of preservation they do, and then be sure to support them in that way. Awesome. Thank you for listening to Green Rapids today.
Green Rapids.
We appreciate you so much.
See y'all soon.
Bye.
Peace out.